Okay, we're up to the very few last 5 words on Sadi Dalet Amid Beis. So we said in yesterday's Gemara that whether you could sell meat to a guy and whether we're concerned that they're going to resell it to a Jew is contingent on if they announce whenever their treif is sold, so then you could buy from a guy because you just make sure not to buy whenever they announce there's a treif. If there's no treif, again, we're talking about a case where all the butchers are Jewish, so there's no concern, the butchers weren't goyim, so all the meat is kosher, at least roiv of the meat is kosher. The concern would be that the Jew sold the guy treifa, so in a situation where they have to announce it every single time, so there's no problem. So Gemara says the following story. There was a certain butcher, we'll call him Reuven, and he had a person that he used to be friends with Shimon, but they had a falling out. So Reuven the butcher says to Shimon, "You have a faisam inoi. If we were on good terms," he's trying to make him feel bad. So Reuven says to Shimon, the butcher says to Shimon, his old friend, he says, if we were close, Miloim Safayalach Mishar Shal Patim Davdi Esmal, I butchered a geschmacka cow yesterday, and I would have shared it with you if we were close, but we're not close anymore, so you lost out. Shimon hears this, and Amar Lei, Achli Meshufr Shufr. Shimon says, I had the steak yesterday from what you butchered. So Amar Lei Minolach. So Reuven says to him, how'd you get that? I didn't sell it to you. How'd you get it? He said, well, I went to a certain non-Jewish meat purveyor, middleman. Again, this is talking about a situation where all the butchers are Jewish, but the stores sometimes were non-Jewish. He said, I went to John's, non-Jewish meat house, and I bought your meat that you sold him. So Amar Lei, so Reuven says to Shimon, Reuven the nasty butcher says to Shimon, Trei Avdi, I actually slaughtered 2 cows yesterday. I sold them both to him, and that one was treif. Now, I didn't announce it, but because I was wrong, but you should know you ate treif. Now, the Gemara assumes that we actually believe Reuven, meaning we don't just think that Reuven made up this whole story just to make Shimon feel bad, but he legitimately actually sold non-kosher meat to the non-Jewish purveyor without announcing it. So the question is, now that we know that this happened, does that mean that this whole system now is kaput? And in this city, you can't buy from Goyim anymore on days that they don't announce because you had a butcher who didn't announce. So Amar Rabbi said, B'shvil shaita zeh she'asa shalaika haygen. And because this butcher Reuven is a shaita, and he acted improperly by not announcing anunesar kol makulin, well, we should get rid of all the meat in the town. Meaning, in other words, we still have roiv. This guy did something wrong. It's a one-off. We don't have to be chayshish that he does this more often, or that he's doing this so much that he's flooding the market with non-kosher meat without announcing it. So you see that Rabbi, despite the fact that this butcher said this, and Rabbi believes this butcher, he still believes you can go with roiv. And Rabbi l'tamei, this is Rabbi l'shitasai, d'amar, because Rabbi once said, mekulin v'tavchi Yisrael, in a city where the meat market is supplied by Jewish butchers, meaning it's Jewish butchers entirely, Bosar hanimtza biyada v'kechavim muter. Anytime you can go to a guy and buy the meat, assuming that they didn't announce that day. So you see that Rabbi holds that, and the Gemara assumes that even if something happened, you could still go with that presumption. Okay, now this is the first version of the story. The Rabbi actually believed this butcher, but still he felt that you can go with roiv. So says the Gemara, Ikadamri, but some have a different version. That the only reason, I'll say it outside, we'll see it inside, that according to this version, the only reason why Rabbi was mekel was not because you go with roiv. He actually holds that once you know that a Jewish butcher was selling non-kosher meat to a guy without announcing it, the entire system falls apart, and you can no longer buy from Goyim anymore on days that they didn't announce. The only reason why Rabbi was mekel, as the Gemara is going to point out according to this version, is because he didn't believe Reuven. He felt that Reuven was just saying this to hurt Shimon. The whole point of this conversation is Reuven is trying to twist the knife into Shimon. So Shimon says, I got the meat, and Reuven's like, oh, that was non-kosher. That's not true. We don't actually believe what he was saying. We believe that he just said that. If we actually believed what he was saying, it would be a problem. The whole system would fall apart. Rabbi said, because this shaita is just trying to aggravate his friend, meaning we don't believe him. He's just trying to aggravate his friend, so we're not going to rip apart the whole system. You can still buy from the Goyim. However, the Gemara speaks it out. The only reason why we're going to continue being mekel is because we believe that Rebbe didn't, that this butcher never actually did this. He's just trying to make his friend feel bad. But let's say it was taka true. It was revealed with, let's say, Eidim, that he sold treif to a guy without announcing it aser. Then taka, the entire system would taka be aser. Says the Gemara, wait, I thought Rebbe's mekel in general. And the Gemara is going to point out, yeah, but not when you actually know that he sold non-kosher meat. Vatani Rebbe oimer basar mekulin v'tavchi yisol basar nimsi yagacham motor. I thought Rebbe is generally mekel you can buy from a guy. And the answer is shani hacha, this chazik isura. Not once you find out that one of the butchers is acting improperly. Once one of the butchers is acting improperly by selling it treif without announcing it, then who's to say that he's not doing this to such a volume that maybe it's Roy Visser, right? You don't know. Once you know, according to this version, once you know that he's done this once, who's to say he hasn't done this 1,000 times? And therefore, while Rebbe is generally mekel, he's not mekel once you find out that there's a guy who's acting improperly. Okay, new topic. This is going to take us a lot of the daf, and that Rav is mechadish, that basar kivan shenesal min ayin aser. The basar hanesal min ayin is aser. That means that meat that was not in the hands of a Jew the entire time is a problem. Now we're familiar with this because we paskin this way, that if a meat is, if you let a guy hold on to meat for a little bit without a Jewish mashgiach, it's a problem because we're afraid that the guy swapped out the kosher meat for non-kosher meat. That's this sugya. Now the truth is, at first the Gemara understands that it's a problem if a guy is in holding the meat, but the Gemara actually is going to shift it slightly. Meisvei, I have a kasha. You're telling me that if a guy, if the meat is out of sight, it's a problem. Rabbi Oimer, Mekulin v'tavchi Yisrael basar nimsi avichav muter. Didn't we just get finished saying that if the butchers are Jewish, that you can buy meat from a guy, but every time you have meat from a guy, it's basar shenesal min ayin. Meaning, if you're telling basar shenesal min ayin means that it has to be in the hands of a Jew the entire time, and if you give it to a guy, it's a problem because we're afraid he swapped it out. Then how did the Rebbe say this whole system worked? That they would sell meat to goyim, and then the days they didn't announce treifa, you could buy from the guy. It's basar shenesal min ayin. So the Gemara says no. Nimtza biyad oibekechavim shani. The Gemara says like this. No, you misunderstand. How we paskin throws a wrench. So don't worry about how we paskin. The Gemara says it's not true. It's not a problem if it's in the hands of a guy. If it's in the hands of the guy, it's fine because we're not concerned that the guy came from out of town. The meat in this community is from the Jewish butchers, and it's fine. Basar shenesal min ayin only applies if nobody's watching. What do I mean nobody's watching? We're afraid. You see, if it's in the hands of a guy, then at least the guy is watching it. So he's the mashgiach. As long as there's a person watching it, it's fine. What's basar shenesal min ayin according to this version? It's if you have meat that's just nobody's watching b'chlal. It's mamash in the middle of the marketplace. So what's the concern? The concern is that a bird came and picked up that meat, and another bird dropped it down. That's the concern. By a bird, an animal, rodent, whatever, took the meat, and another animal dropped the other meat, and it's not the same meat. And animals can come from out of town. That's the point. So says the Gemara, the reason why Rebbe was mekel is because it's not meat that's unsupervised. But according to this, it's meat that's unsupervised, not meat that's unsupervised by a Jew. It's meat that's completely unsupervised. Okay? We're going to ask another shayla on Rav. Again, this chiddush, that basar shenesal min ayin is a problem. And right now we're saying that it's only a problem if it's unsupervised b'chlal. But if it's in the hands of a guy, then you could trust the guy that he didn't swap it out from another town. Tashema, teisha chanuyos, kulan meichers basar shchuta. You have 9 stores in the town, all sell kosher meat. Vachas meichers basar nevela. But one sells non-kosher meat. So there's 9 kosher butchers, 1 non-kosher butcher. And you buy from one of the stores. You went into the store. You don't remember which store you went into. So this is an example. You'll say we go basar roiv. No, because the shayla originated in the store itself. You were the one who went into the store, and the shayla originated in the store. And the store is what's called kavua. The store is meant to be there. This is the concept called kol kavua kamech samech sadami, which means that when the shayla arises in a established location, there is no roiv. It's 50-50. So because the shayla was established or originated in an established location, not in the street, It was established it was originated in the store, which is kavua, it's established. Therefore, there's no rive, it's 50-50, so it's a problem. So despite the fact that 90% of the meat in the community is kosher, we're not going to be megal. Sveika yaser. Okay, ubenimsa, but if you find meat in the street, so then you can go basa rive, because when did the shaila originated? It originated not in the established makom, not in the store, it originated in the street. So then you go basa rive. So rive is kosher. That's the halacha. Halacha rive. Fine. Here's the problem though. If you found the meat in the street, I get it, you can go basa rive, but what about the fact that it's basar shenasal min ayin? You tell me you found meat in the street in the middle of Kew Garden Hills, and majority of meat in Kew Garden Hills is kosher. So you found the meat in Kew Garden Hills sitting on the pile, so you could eat it. But what about the fact that it's basar shenasal min ayin? It's unsupervised. So the Gemara says, "Hachanami bi nimtza bi'arev gechavim." This case also, it was in the hands of a guy, meaning when it says that it was found outside, it doesn't mean that it was found lying on the pile. It means a guy was outside with a piece of meat, and he doesn't know where he started. And it's not like the shaila originated in the store, because obviously he went to a store, but you weren't. The shaila originates with the interaction of a yid. The interaction of the yid is in the street, because that's the first time he encounters with the meat. And it's not that the meat is sitting in a pile. We're saying, no, Basar Shesal Mayim is only unsupervised Legamri, and over here, it was in the hands of a guy. So it's not Basar Shesal Min Ayin, it's just a shayla of whether it's kosher or non-kosher, and that you can go Basar Rav. Okay. Tashema. Now the reason why obviously this is strange, we don't pass in this way. We pass in that Basar Shesal Min Ayin is not just unsupervised Legamri, even by a guy, is also Basar Shesal Min Ayin, means unsupervised by a yid. But we're going with the approach that Basar Shesal Min Ayin means completely unsupervised. Tashema. Another Mishnah that seems to reject Rab's teaching of Basar Shenasal Min Ayin. The Mishnah says, Matzah ba basar, if you found meat in a city with Jews and Goyim, so hol chacharayv tavachim, you go basar rayv. Okay. Ve'im mavushal, but if the meat is cooked, hol chacharayv eichel basar, then you can't go basar rayv. You can't go basar rayv butchers. If you find raw meat, you go basar rayv butchers. If you find cooked meat, then you have to go basar roiv of the inhabitants, because even if roiv of the butchers are Jewish, but if roiv of the people are goyim cook meat too. So if you find a cooked steak, you can't say, well, roiv of the butchers are Jewish. Who cares? Because it was clearly cooked by a person. So you have to go basar roiv. That's the Mishnah. What do you see over here? You see that if the majority of the people are Jewish, and you found a piece of meat, and again we assume it's completely unsupervised, it's raw meat, you say you go basar roiv of the butchers. What about Basar Shenasal Min Ayin? It makes no reference to this. So what are you going to say? The answer we've been given before. It's not unsupervised. A guy had it the whole time. So then I don't understand it. What did the Mishnah then say? Wait, so you tell me that it's not unsupervised, because that's Basar Shenasal Min Ayin. It means it's held by a guy. So what's the halacha? And if it's cooked, you go Basar Roiv of the people in the city. If a guy has meat that's cooked, don't you assume he cooked it? You have a city that's 90 Bnei Brak, you have 90% Yidden, okay, and you find cooked meat. So we thought it was completely unsupervised, and it says you go basar roiv, people cook meat, and Bnei Brak are kosher, Jewish. So Mara says no, but it's unsupervised. No, it means a guy is holding it. A guy has meat. So if the guy has meat, then how do you go basar roiv? Then obviously he cooked it. Right? If he's holding it, then that's a problem. You know, it's a rive. You go into a guy's kitchen and you say, when he's got a steak on his plate, you say, "Oh, rive of the community is Jewish." What's a nafkamina? He's holding it, so it's a pella. So the Gemara says you're right. The truth is, it doesn't mean it's not unsupervised, but it's not also held by a guy. So how could that be? It means a Jew is watching it the whole time. What's the case? It's never unsupervised. A Jew is always watching. So what's the suffix? The case is like this. I see a guy walking by. I only see the back of his head. So I don't know if he's Jewish or not. He's wearing a coat, whatever. And he drops a piece of meat. I'm watching the whole time. I don't know if the person who held the meat originally was Jewish, non-Jewish, kosher, non-kosher. I know it's not unsupervised because he held it and now I'm watching it the whole time. So it's not unsupervised meat. So it's not Basar Shenasal Min Ayin, because a Jew was watching the whole time. And according to this, Basar Shenasal Min Ayin doesn't just mean unsupervised because of birds. It means even Goyim also. It means a Jew has to be watching the whole time. But a Jew could be watching the whole time. It could still be a suffix. Just because I'm watching the whole time doesn't mean I know what's going on. I'm watching the whole time, but I don't know what's going on. Tashema, another Shaila on Rav. Nimtza b'gvulin. Now this is a Mishnah That's referring to meat that's found in. This is talking about meat was found, I think, in the Azara. Yeah. No, is this meat found in Yerushalayim? In the Azara, you could assume most meat is karbanos. You find meat in Yerushalayim. So is it a karban? Is it holy? Is it not holy? So the halacha is like this. Evarim, if the meat was cut up into large limbs, it's nevelis. You could assume it's non-kosher. Why? Yeah, 1 second, I'm sorry. Yeah, because apparently when people discard meat, they cut it into large limbs. So because it's cut up into limbs, you could assume that it's non-kosher, it's nevela, and that's why they left it like that. But chatichas, but if the meat is cut up into nice slices, it's mutares. You could assume it's kosher. It's Yerushalayim, which is the majority of meat in Yerushalayim is kosher, and it's cut up nicely. See, if it's cut up into large pieces, that's how they would discard it into the trash, and you could assume it's trash. But if it's sliced up into nice pieces, then you could assume that it's kosher. That's the Mishnah. It's the same problem. If it's cut up into slices, you're saying it's mutter. What about the fact that it's basar shenasal min ha'ayin? And if you want to say, okay, the case is where a Jew is watching the whole time. So then I don't understand what's the halacha. If it's sliced up into meat, it's kosher. But if it's large limbs, it's a problem. If a Jew is watching the whole time, then why, if it's limbs, is it a problem? The only reason why you assume limbs are a problem is because I don't know what happened here. I don't know if a Jew left it here accidentally, in which case it's kosher meat, or a Jew was trying to throw it out into the trash. So if it's large limbs, then I can assume he threw it into the trash. But if a Jew is watching the whole time, then I'm looking. If he put it down, then it's kosher. If he threw it away like it's trash, then I don't understand. Meaning, what's the distinction? Why is it if you throw... Yeah, if it shouldn't be the chiluk shouldn't be sliced meat as opposed to limbs. It should be, if you watch it, I could tell if a guy's throwing out meat like in the trash, or if he's placing it down accidentally. So if you're telling me that there's a Jew watching the whole time because of basar shenasal min ha'ayin, then I don't understand the distinction. Why is it by limbs? Is it nevela? So the Gemara says, Midu time Rav. Well, who's the one who said the basar shenasal min ha'ayin is a thing? It was a chiddush of Rav. The truth is, Rav commented on that Mishnah. Rav Amar Muteres Mishum Nevela. Rav actually says that it's actually not nevela when it comes to tuma. You can't eat it, but it's actually not nevela. Hold on 1 second. I'm sorry.
Recording.
So I'm sorry. Hold on.
Recording in progress.
No, so the Gemara, this one, Midu Tamil Rav. The question is, why is it that by full limbs it's a problem, but by sliced meat it's mutter? If we're talking about a case, what about basar shenasal min ha'ayin? If it's sliced up, it's mutter. What about basar shenasal min ha'ayin? So the Gemara says, a Jew's watching. If a Jew's watching, then why by the limbs is it a problem? I could tell if he didn't mean to throw it out. So the Gemara says, you're right. Itaka is basar shenasal min ha'ayin. It says chatichas mutaros. Doesn't mutter mean to eat? The answer is no. Midu tamil Rav. Rav Amar Muteres Mishum Nevela. Rav says when it says mutaros, it doesn't mean you could eat the sliced meat because it's basar shenasal min ha'ayin. It just means it's asur d'Rabbanan. It just means that it's not asur d'Oraisa, it's not a nevela. So when he says, the truth is, it's taka, there's no one watching, there's no one observing. So if it's large limbs, you have to assume that it was meant to be thrown out in the trash, and then it's a nevela, it's asur d'Oraisa, and it's metame like a nevela, etc., etc. When it says chatichos, that if they were cut into slices mutaros, what it means is, I could assume in that case that the guy did not mean to throw it out. So it's probably kosher meat. It's basar shenasal min ha'ayin, so I can't eat it. Mutaros just means it's not metame mishum nevela, but it's not actually mutter, because there's a side issue of basar shenasal min ha'ayin. So when it says mutter, it actually doesn't really mean mutter. Levi disagrees. He says no, mutaros ba'achila. Levi actually holds mutter ba'achila. Levi holds that basar shenasal min ha'ayin is not a thing. I don't care that it's unsupervised. If the majority of the meat in this town is kosher, even if it's unsupervised, Levi is mekel. Okay. So we've been discussing the shita of Rav that basar shenasal min ha'ayin is a problem. Says the Gemara, Hadarav lav beferish itmar el mechlala itmar. The truth is, Rav never stated explicitly that basar shenasal min ha'ayin is a problem. It's just something we figured out. The Rav have a Yosef Amabra the Ishtamit. Rav was sitting by the boat crossing the Ishtamit river. Chazil hu gavra. He saw a certain person. Go to the next page. Apparently he was cleaning, I guess, a head of an animal in the river. And he dropped it. He dropped the head. Let's say he had a goat head in the river. He drops it in the river. Okay. He brings a basket to scoop out the goat head. But Shada Asik train. But instead of getting what goat head, he got 2 goat heads. In other words, there was obviously another goat head there. So he drops 1 goat head, but he pulls out 2 goat heads. So there was some other animal that had been there before. So Amar Rav sees this and he says, Avdi Nami Hachi. This is a possibility. You could drop a head and find 2 heads. It must be there were other heads in the water beforehand. Asur Nile. They're all Asur. That's what Rav said. Asur Nile. Hold on 1 second. Sorry.
Progress.
So in other words, so Rav sees this and he says, I would think, as an outside observer, you have 2 heads here, so if you could try to say that probably is the head that you found, then it's mutter. Or if you're in a community where the majority of meat is kosher, you should say both are mutter. Rav says no. Once the meat head, the goat head, was out of view, it's basar shenasalman, we're out. Why? Because you know what? Maybe one of these heads are not even the one that you had. Maybe both of them are new heads, and they were heads from before, and the takatrev. In other words, once Rav holds that once there's meat out of sight, then I don't know what happened. Is it possible that one of the meatheads was mine and the other one is another one? Perhaps. Or maybe neither were mine, and there were 2 heads there, and my head drifted away. So the Gemara says, so that's the source of Basar Shenasalman. Amar Rav Kahana Ravasi l'Rav. Rav Kahana Ravasi said to Rav, the Isur Shchicha Dater L'Shchicha. Why are you assuming that it's non-kosher, even if these heads are not mine? What about, roiv of the meat is kosher? Armalei, the Isura Shchichi Tvei. That prohibited meat is more common. In other words, I'm choishish for birds coming in and dropping heads, and then once you're taking it from other towns, I don't care. In other words, this whole heter that you go bas a roiv of the town is only if you know that the meat stayed in this town the whole time. Once the meat was out of view, and it might have been dropped in from a bird before, whatever it is, then you go bas a roiv of the world. Roiv of the world is not kosher. So this is the source of basar shenasalman ayin. Again, we're talking about a case, pashtus, where the roiv of the meat in that community is kosher, and yet because it was out of view under the water, he held it's a problem. So Rav never explicitly said basar shenasalman was a problem, but we figured out from the story. But as I mentioned yesterday, any time you have a halacha that is not explicitly stated, but you could deduce it out, it's not as stark. So says the Gemara v'chi mechlalamai. So the very fact that it's from an inference, that's not as good. Why not? What's the problem with this story? So says the Gemara, perhaps it's actually not a problem basar shenasalman in general. Maybe that community, that water area, is roiv goyim. And the reason why Rav was machmir is because Rov Goyim. But in a community where it's Rov kosher, even if the meat is unsupervised, maybe he would be making all these nachoshish for a raven coming out. That's why this story is not the best source, but we deduce that is his opinion. So according to Rav, the Gemara just speaks it out. According to Rav, basar shenasalman is a problem. So how did Rav ever eat meat? So it obviously had to always be supervised. Elo Rav hechi achol basara. So how did Rav ever eat meat? So the Gemara says b'shaita d'lo olam einei. First of all, he might have just ate meat by the butcher house. They would cook it right away. He would never take his eyes off of it. Or perhaps it was tied and sealed. He was chaysim. He put like a plumba, as they say, like some sort of tag on it. Or inami b'simen, or he made a siman. He cut the meat in an identifying way that it was a siman. Ki hada Rabbi Rav Huna mechatach le atlas karnosa. Rabbi Rav Huna would cut his meat into triangles, and that was his siman. And therefore, there's no chashash that it came from another community or someone swapped it out because it has an identifying factor. So according to this, basar shenasalman, let's say practical halacha, you give it to a guy, and then the guy takes the meat for a half hour, whatever it is. You need a siman. The siman could either be that it looks it has a specific way that this kosher meat looks that non-kosher meat doesn't, and therefore it's hard to identify. You have this sometimes in a restaurant. You go Uber Eats and it doesn't come with a package, it doesn't come sealed. That's a problem with basar shenasalman. But let's say that restaurant has a very unique looking food. Burgers and hot dogs look the same, but let's say it has a very specific type of sandwich that's like miyuchid for that. So, non-kosher sandwiches don't look like that, so that would be that's a sim. Rav have a ka'asal lebei Rav Chanan chasne. Rav was going to his son-in-law Rav Chanan's house. Chazi mabar dekasi lape. As he arrived, he saw a ferry coming towards him. And Omar mabra ka'asi lapi yoyim etav legap. The fact that a ferry is coming to me, it's a good sign. It's going to be a good day today. It's a sign of a good fortune. We're going to have a good meal. We'll have a good meal. It's a good sign. By the way, the Gemara is going to point this out. How this is allowed, the Gemara is going to talk about. It's not so pashut. You can't look for omens, looking for signs. A black cat runs across the street. That's a bad sign. The fairy coming to you is a good sign. That's lois nachashu. So how Rav did this, the Gemara will address. So oidik vibiza dadasha. Azal Kama Baba, after crossing the river, he stood by the gate of his son-in-law's house. Oidik bebiza dadasha. He looked through the crack in the door to see what was going on. He looked through the window. Chazi chayasa d'Italia. He saw that they were shechting meat, animals in the house. So Tarva Baba, he knocks on the door. Nafik asu kuli amlape. Everyone came out to greet Rav. Asatav chanami, including the butchers. While they left the house to greet him, there was no one in the house, leaving the meat unsupervised. The whole time Rav, as he's like greeting everyone, in the corner of his eye, he's watching the meat, to like the Bila Mashgiach. So Amar Lu Eicho Hashta, so he said to the butchers, if I had relied on you, you would have served my family non-kosher meat. In other words, the Rav holds that Basar Shanamin is a problem, and the fact that you came to greet me and you left the meat unsupervised, that's a problem. So he was watching. He was saying, if not for me watching, it would be a problem. But despite the fact that he watched the whole time, Rav Mahu Bisra, Rav refused to eat the meat. Now the question is, why did Rav refuse to eat the meat? If it's Basar Shanamin, he was watching the whole time. My time, well, what was his objection to eating the meat? It wasn't Basar Shanamin because Rav was watching the whole time. So it says the Gemara El Denachish. The issue Rav had was he was sort of, because he looked at the ferry coming to him as a good sign, which is not allowed. Therefore, and he was planning, we'll have a good meal. So he put the meal in this, and he felt that he did something wrong, and therefore he didn't want to eat the meat. He didn't want to eat from the meal as sort of like a punishment because he looked at the meal as a good sign. He says when the boat was coming to him, he says, the fact that the boat's coming to me is a good sign, and we're going to have a meal because we'll be, we'll celebrate a good simon from Hashem. He felt that was an isser. What he did was asser of lois nachashu, and therefore he didn't want to eat the meat. Here's the problem. That's not really lo senachashu. Lo senachashu is not just looking for good simonim. It's only if you rely on that simon to do or not to do. Meaning, if I just say, that's a good sign from Shemayim, I would do it anyway. Okay, good, Baruch Hashem. I'm going to travel anyway. All of a sudden, beautiful weather. I'm like, great, it's a good sign from Shemayim. That's fine. The problem is, if I say, I will only travel if it stops raining in the next 20 minutes. If it doesn't stop raining, not because of, I will only travel if there's a rainbow here. And if there's no rainbow here, I'm not going to do it. Meaning I completely make my decisions contingent on the sign. That's the problem. That's lois nachashu. The Gemara says, didn't Rav himself say, Kol nachash she'ena k'Eliezer eved Avram ki Yonasan ben Shaul ina nachash? The only osir type of lois nachashu is like Eliezer eved Avram, who said that I will only give this wife to Yitzchak if she does this, and if she doesn't, she doesn't. That's a sign that's not allowed. Or Yonasan ben Shaul, where he was deciding whether to fight with his shamish, and he basically said, we're going to approach the Plishti soldiers, and if they tell us to come, then we'll attack. There's a whole story. That's a problem, because they were mamish making the decision contingent on this. Now, by the way, Taisus points out, so how could Eliezer Eved Avram, do something aser, and how could Yonasan ben Shaul do something aser? So a lot of Mefarshim say, it doesn't mean they themselves actually would have done it with or without these simanim. It just means someone who's like them, meaning someone who completely makes this the decision contingent on the good omen.
Recording in progress.
Yeah, by the way, other Mefarshim point out, the truth is Eliezer and Yonasan, it's not a problem of lois nachashu anyway, because their decisions were very sensible. Eliezer is looking for a wife for Yitzchak, so he wants to make sure that he has a balas midas. Yonasan wanted to know the confidence of the soldiers he was attacking. The point of the Gemara is saying is that it's only a problem of lois nachashu if you would make the decisions contingent like them. They happen to be mutter because it was sensible. But if you make a non-sensible decision contingent on omens, that's when it's a problem. And that wasn't the case here. Because Rav was going to come on the boat anyway. He was just saying, the fact that the boat is coming right away, it's a sign from Shemaim that it's going to be a matzliach tika trip. He was going to make the trip anyway, so it's not lois nachashu. So why did he not eat from the meal? So the Gemara says, Sudas Rishus Hava. Rather, the reason why he didn't eat from the meal wasn't a Sudas mitzvah, it was a Sudas Rishus. Now, by the way, Rashi says, what was a Sudas mitzvah? A Sudas mitzvah is if a Bas Talmid Chacham, a I'm sorry. What's not an example of Sudas Mitzvah? What was the Sudas Rishos? It was a chasana, but the daughter of a Talmid Chacham and Hamaretz. Bas Talmid Chacham and Hamaretz, it's a Sudas Rishos. It's not a mitzvah. So Tzemach Tzedek used to say that in order to avoid this, you have to make sure that Bas Talmid Chacham is not marrying an Hamaretz. So the Tzemach Tzedek used to say that the definition of an Hamaretz is someone who doesn't know a Masechta. So he would advise, the Rebbe also would advise that when Chasanim would get engaged, they should learn a small Masechta, know it well. It could be Pirkei Avos, Maseches Kala, Maseches Zuta, whatever it is, so that they don't fall under this mistake of making the Chasana Sudas Rishos. For Rav, Rav refused to eat from Sudas Rishos. He only ate from Sudas Mitzvah. Now the Gemara says before, although it wasn't Loisen Achashu, but they would look at Simonim to see if this trip is going to be Matzliach. And if those Simon didn't come, not that they would make the decision solely based on the Simanim, they would sort of reevaluate the trip and then find out if it's Ratzon Hashem. Rav Badik Mebabra. Rav, as we had before, he would check with the ferries. If the ferry came right away, then that was a sign for him that he'll be Matzliach on the trip, and if not, then he would reevaluate whether this is the Ratzon Hashem. Shmuel Badik Besifra. Shmuel would open up a sefer. This is like the Ger Lagra. He would just open up a Chumash, the first pasuk that he would see, that he would look at that as a sign. And Rav Yechanan Badik Biyanuka. Rav Yechanan would ask a young child what's the pasuk they learned in yeshiva, and then he would look at that as a simon from Shemaim. Again, not to solely make the decision based on this, because that would be loisen achashu, but something to think about. So the Gemara says the following story of Yechanan asking a child for a pasuk and basing a decision on this. Kuli shani de Rav. As long as Rav was alive, have a kosele Rav Yechanan. When Rav Yechanan would write a letter to Rav, he would say Rabbeinu shebebavel, our teacher in Bavel. So Rav Yechanan showed a lot of chashivas to Rav. Kinach nafshe, when Rav died and Shmuel replaced him, right? Rav and Shmuel have a kos of the Shmuel. Rav Yechanan now started writing correspondence to Shmuel. Again, Rav Yechanan was in Eretz Yisrael. Rav and Shmuel were in Bavel. When Rav was in charge, he would write to him, the leader of Bavel. When he passed away and Shmuel took over, he would say Chavereinu shebebavel. He wrote to Shmuel, my friend, that he didn't show the same level of chashivas to Shmuel. So Shmuel was bothered because he didn't know of Shmuel's prowess. So Amar lo yadim imidi derabine ano. So Shmuel said to himself, "There's nothing that I'm not a Rebbe of his. Meaning, there's nothing I'm not. I'm his colleague. Don't I know more than Rav Yechanan?" And I guess Rav Yechanan was younger at the time. Kasav shadle ibur de shitin. So Shmuel wanted to show his proficiency. Again, he's the leader of Klal Yisrael, so he wanted to show who he was for the Kavod HaTorah. So he sent a letter to Rav Yechanan showing the calculations of the Iber year for 60 years straight to show his gadlus. So Rav Yechanan sees this letter. He says, "Hashta chushbana ba'al miyoda." So he's good at numbers. It's not a Talmid Chacham. There are people that are they're very good with calculating things. It's not a Talmid Chacham. So Kasev Shadele Tleiser Gamli Sveket Trifasa. Shmuel then wrote like a treatise that there were 13 camel loads of questionable treifas, and he addressed each one. So, meaning he basically sent him a whole list of shilos of treifas, or the actual animals themselves. Yeah, it sounds like actual animals itself. According to others, it was scrolls about treifas. In other words, he showed his chashivas in the laws of treifas. Rav Yechanan said, "Oh wow, I have a Rav in Bavel now. I should go visit him." Rav Yechanan was in Eretz Yisrael. He said, "I should go to Bavel." So Amli Yanuka, so before he went to the trip, he asked the child, "Psukli psukecha, what's the pasuk that you're learning right now?" So Amrlei u'Shmuel meis. So he said, "I'm learning the pasuk in Shmuel. It says Shmuel died." So Rav Yechanan says, "Oh, Shema Mina, no, Shmuel." Rav Yechanan says, "It must be that this Shmuel passed away. I don't have to travel. I shouldn't go to travel him." The Gemara says, "V'loihi." It's actually not true. Shmuel didn't actually die. Hashem sent this sign through the child because Hashem did not want Rav Yechanan to be matriach himself, to have to travel all that way to Shmuel. Shmuel didn't actually die, but it was Hashem's way of saying, "Don't travel," because it's not necessary for you to matriach yourself to go that way to visit Shmuel. Tanir Shem Elazar Omer Bayis Tinik V'Isha, regarding building a house, giving birth to a child, or marrying a woman. Ava b'shein nachash yesh siman. Even though we don't do nachash, we don't look for omens, but there are simanim. What does that mean? So Rashi says, if you had success in your first business venture after these things, after building a home, or after giving birth to a child and marrying a woman, he had atzlacha, that's a sign from Shemayim you'll be matzliach. You'll continue having success. But if not, not. The Gemara clarifies. Again, it doesn't mean that you actually make the decision based on this. It just means you should reevaluate whether this is a good business venture. And Amr of Elazar, v'hu dischazik tlas zimni. This is only if the omen repeats itself 3 times. You have to do 3 business ventures after it, all 3 times. 3 is the chazaka. How do I know this? Tichsiv, because when Yaakov Avinu was worried about losing his children, he said, Yosef enenu, I already lost Yosef. V'shem enenu, ves Binyamin tikach, you want to take Binyamin? I can't lose 3. Once 3, it's established. That's established for negativity, so kal v'chomer that should be established for positivity. So says the Gemara, Boy minei Rav Huna once asked Rav, we said before that in order to avoid basar shenasal ma'ayin, you need to have a siman. He said, b'charuzin ma'u, what if the meat is strung up like pieces together on a string? Is that a siman? Amalei, alti shoyte b'charuzin. How is a siman? What a foolish question. Of course it's a siman. Ikad amri, amr Rav Huna merav, b'charuzin how is a siman? According to this version, he just said it's a siman. Rav Nachman ben Ardai, ikul agabe Rav Kahana l'fum nar mal yom Kippur. Rav Nachman ben Ardai visited Rav Kahana on Erev Yom Kippur. Asu arve shadu b'chdei v'chalisa. Apparently there were so many people cooking on Erev Yom Kippur that birds were picking up livers and kidneys and dropping on the street. They would pick up from this house, dropping on the other street. So Amar lei shkol v'azol, shkol v'echol. So Rav Nachman said to Rav Kahana, you could eat it. Ha'idna de'atera shchichi tvei. Even though it's basar shenesal min ayin, but in Erev Yom Kippur there's so many people. Most of the shchita that was done today. Yeah, actually, Rashi. Let me explain. It is Rav Kahana actually disagrees with the Rav. He holds that basar shenesal min ayin is mutter. You just have to have roiv. Now that community didn't have roiv kosher meat, but in Erev Yom Kippur, roiv meat that's being butchered and cooked is for Yom Kippur. So therefore, you can go with roiv, and therefore it's fine. Rashi holds that Rav Kahana actually is choylek on Rav, and he holds that basar shenesal min ayin is mutter. Okay. Other Rishonim disagree. Fine. The Gemara says Rav Chia bar Ravin itvele karkosha b'nei dani. Rav Chia bar Ravin lost a piece of the stomach's intestines by the barrels. And meaning he lost in that area, and then he eventually found it. The question is, it's basar shenesal min ayin, right? Because it was unsupervised, he didn't see it. So Asla Kami de Rav Huna, he goes in front of Rav Huna, he says, can I eat it? Amar lei, it's like siman begava, right? We said basar shenesal min ayin is fixed by simanim. So you have a siman, Amar lei loy. He says, it's like tviyas eina, begava, but do you have tviyas ayin? Tviyas ayin means visual recognition. This is a big side. There's a heter of basar shenesal min ayin, which is if you recognize it. If you recognize it. Do you recognize it? Is it a siman? No, but I recognize this is the meat that I had. So do you recognize that this is the piece of meat? I'm in. He says, Imkein zil shkal. Then you could eat it. A similar story of Chanina Chayzah, Itzvah Legabah de Bisra. Chanina lost a piece of the meat, like from a steak of the back of the animal. Also come to Rav Nachman. Amalei is a simon gavah. So you have a simon. Amalei loy. Is a tviyas ayin begavah? Do you have tviyas ayin? Amalei in. Imkein zil shkal. Tviyas ayin is enough. Even though tviyas ayin is not something we return by lost objects, except for your Talmid Chacham. Tviyas ayin is not enough, right? If I find a dollar bill that has no simanim, I say, oh, that's my dollar bill. We don't trust you unless you're Talmid Chacham. But tviyas ayin works for basar shenesal min ayin. Renasan bar Abaye itbale kibura de tchilta. Renasan bar Abaye lost a spool of tchelas. Tchelas also needs simanim, similar to meat, because they're always afraid of counterfeits. So also came to Rav Chisda, he found the thing and he wanted to know, is it it's like tchelas misal min ayin. Amalei is a sim bagava. Do you have a sim? Amalei loy. Is a tviyas ayin bagava? Do you have tviyas ayin? Amalei in. He says imkein zil shkol. Amar Rava, maybe we'll get to the Mishnah. Rava says, Mereish originally have Amina, Simana Adav Mitviyas Ayin. I used to think that a siman, an identifying mark, is a stronger sign than Tviyas Ayin. Why? Tab Mahadrin Avidza b'siman, because we return lost objects with a siman. V'loy Mahadrin Mitviyas Ayin, we don't return it to Tviyas Ayin unless you're Talmid Chacham. Tviyas Ayin is not enough. Simanim work for lost objects. But now that I see that basar shenesal min ayin tviyas ayin is enough, amina tviyas ayin adifa. I actually think tviyas ayin is actually stronger than simanim. Hold on 1 second. I'm sorry.
Recording stopped. So recording in progress.
Just to finish up. So tviyas ayin is even better because it applies even by basar shenesal min ayin, which is isurim as opposed to just money. I'll prove it to you the effectiveness of tviyas ayin. If not for tviyas ayin, how does a blind man ever live with his wife? Maybe she's another woman. Or stam, an average man who has sight, how are they allowed to live with their wives in a dark room where there's no light on? Maybe it's another woman. What's the answer? Tvias ayin dekala. It's called tvias ayin, meaning I recognize her. I recognize her voice. I recognize her voice. Whatever. That's tvias ayin. It's not a siman. It's tvias ayin. So hachanami tvias ayin. So you see, tvias ayin is effective. Similarly, the Gemara says, "Amar vitzu b'der mashar she'teda." I'll prove it to you that simanim are not as strong as tvias ayin. Dilu also betrei v'amri. If two people, Reuven and Shimon, come forward in a case of execution, a case of a life and death situation, a capital case, that's the word. They say, we saw this guy killed someone. Now, we don't know who he is. Meaning, we don't recognize him. It's not like, I recognize that guy. But I don't recognize the guy, but I have simanim. The guy that killed someone had a scar on his shoulder, and he had a mole on his neck. Is it that guy? I can't tell you. I don't recognize the guy. I don't have to be a sign. But I can tell you, I remember a mole, I remember a scar. Do you think they'll kill someone based on that is enough? No, because maybe someone else has a scar on his shoulder and his mole on his neck. Right? Look at but if witnesses come forward and say, "Oh, we recognize it's John, and John killed him," then they would. So you see that Tzvias Ayin is more effective. Similarly, we'll end with this. Amrav Ashi, I'll prove it to you. If a person sends a shliach and he says, go call so and so, and you don't tell the guy who he is because the guy doesn't recognize him. But say, go find the guy in the street, call him over. He's got a mole on his on his neck. The Gemara says, Safek Yada or Safek Yada. Maybe it's going to be effective, maybe not. Maybe he'll find the guy, maybe he won't find the guy. Maybe he'll find the guy that also has a mole, but it's the wrong guy. If you listen to Tvias Ayin, but if the shliach recognizes the guy, then Kilach Hazal Yada, he'll be able to get him. So you see, Tvias Ayin is more effective in identifying than even Simanim. I will stop here.